Gay Evening News Show, and it's 7 p.m. Tuesday, March 17, 2020. We begin in Breaking Q News tonight by reporting what's happening in Florida, and specifically the gayest place on planet Earth. Governor DeSantis has closed many Florida businesses. Before we tell the story, watch this.
In terms of restaurants, we're going to do similar to what California did, where you have 50% capacity limitation. Seating needs to be staggered and limited to ensure that seated parties are separated by a distance of at least 6 feet. Of course, this virus is transmitted when you were within 6 feet of somebody. And so we are going to encourage people, consistent with the president's guidance, to utilize takeout and delivery services. We're also going to be requiring that the restaurants screen all employees and prohibit entry for employees that may have a positive response to any of the trigger questions in terms of health. Now, we did this. This is the floor for Florida for the foreseeable future. Was in contact with some of the mayors in South Florida, like Mayor Jimenez. I think you're going to see Miami probably go further than that, and we support the efforts that the locals are doing. I think this is a virus that is affecting the whole state, but I think it affects different communities differently. The response may not always be the same on every little thing. We have a number of counties that have not had a single case, and so I feel that this makes the most sense. It gives the flexibilities to locals to go further if they want to, but also recognizes that we do have some areas where we haven't seen this yet. Bars and nightclubs, effective 5 p.m. today, they're going to be suspended for 30 days in the state of Florida. I think you've seen a lot of things about people congregating at some of these things. We view that as something that could be problematic for spreading the virus.
Well, the news is certainly evolving in Florida and all over the country as it relates to coronavirus. The governor has had very specific recommendations today from this press conference on what Florida is going to do over the next 30 days. This is being modified by individual local communities, either on a county level or a municipality level in individual cities. Here in Fort Lauderdale, where we broadcast, for example, at 5 p.m. a restaurant ban in terms of in-restaurant dining went into effect only for delivery or takeout, and bars have been closed. And individual cities are going to respond on a case-by-case basis to add to Governor DeSantis's individual policies that he announced today. Before we talk about coronavirus and the specifics of what we are watching today, this is an evolving story, of course. We want to point out to you that this Thursday, March 19, we are going to have a very specific LGBTQ Q&A. We call it Q&A on the coronavirus. And we have a number of special guests from different seat perspectives, including the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, Dean Trentellis. We're going to have medical doctors and also HIV specialists that will be able to answer your questions that you have specifically as it relates to the LGBT community in relation to coronavirus. So make sure you tune in on this Thursday, March 19 at 7 p.m. for that very special Q&A on the coronavirus. So in reporting and looking at today's news about what the governor here in Florida and other places did, we're going to talk about New York more specifically in just a bit. What do y'all think about what we've watched today in Corona?
I'm very excited to see some actions being taken finally. I know that we are a little bit behind where we might want to be, but at least we are ahead of where the long-term effects could be mitigated. We are hopefully keeping ourselves ahead of the curve. We're helping to flatten it right now. And while a lot of people I know watching anecdotally on Facebook, on social media, and just in person seem to want to go out and businesses still want to stay open, I'm glad that we at least have some leadership that's showing us that that is not what is in the best interest of the public health.
Yeah, this is about precaution and preparedness and policies that are ready to lead on day one. And I'm happy to see the governor have this press conference today. I think it's long overdue. In a state where a majority of our population is people who are retirees, snowbirds, and people particularly over the age of 65 who many of them happen to have compromised immune systems, but many of them are the most susceptible to contracting this coronavirus and potentially having a much increased fatality from this. virus. I find it frustrating that this is coming, but better late than never. But I do wish that the governor would have had this press conference and many of these mandates, if you will, the state of emergency in the state of Florida. I wish he would have had this weeks ago.
In terms of Fort Lauderdale's announcement, we're broadcasting. We're actually in a municipality called Wilton Manors here in the middle of Broward County, surrounded completely by the giant metropolitan community of Fort Lauderdale, America. That's what you know of our area. The mayor's office makes these very significant announcements today. What is your political gut in terms of how other communities are going to match what Fort Lauderdale has done in Broward County, for example, and how that might be replicated around the country?
Well, of course, I have to first say my disclaimer that I'm always speaking for myself and nobody else.
Right.
But, I'm very proud of our mayor as well as our commission here in the city of Fort Lauderdale. You had said something earlier, and I completely agree with that. We have 31 cities in Broward County, and I think people often look to the city of Fort Lauderdale for guidance and what we're doing, trickling down to other cities and municipalities. So I do think that we'll continue to see the model, if you will, that Fort Lauderdale has put into place be a model for those other surrounding cities all throughout Broward County.
It's also interesting to me, America. We have said for a year and a half that it's happening out, and now we have done Q News Tonight. It has become the most popular LGBT news source in the world. 100,000 of you watched last week in YouTube alone, which is incredible. I would not say there's anything lucky about coronavirus. However, we are, and we have made the joke that we're broadcasting from the gayest place on planet Earth. That is going to serve the LGBT community very, very well. We're sitting in ground zero of what we're observing in the LGBT community. So evaluating what is happening in South Florida, in Broward County, and in Fort Lauderdale is going to serve us very well in the next days, weeks, and potentially months in terms of how the LGBT community responds. So we remind you, on Thursday, March 19th, we are going to do a special Q&A on coronavirus, and we have many special guests, including the mayor of the gayest city on planet Earth, Fort Lauderdale, Dean Trentellis, medical professionals, and HIV specialists that are going to answer your specific questions. We're going to myth bust. You'll be able to ask whatever concerns you have about coronavirus as they affect you, and specifically your special needs for the LGBT community. So good evening again, America. It's 7 p.m. Tuesday, March 17th, 2020, and it is literally time to queer up the news. We are out of the closet and into the headlines, and so many of your stories are going to be explored next on Q News Tonight.
Tonight on the world's first live daily queer evening news show.
Tonight's news about the gay community and the news from an LGBTQ perspective. Are our gay stories important to you? In headlines, politics, entertainment, gay culture, travel, religion, and more. Reported by respected anchors.
Out of the closet and into the headlines on Q News Tonight.
Well, America, welcome to Q News Tonight. We are live and unscripted except for our outline of our stories that we do. So anything can happen. Tonight we bring you the news of and a perspective from the LGBT community. I am your anchor, Al Ferguson, and these are my co-anchor partners, Aaron Darr and Napoleon Plays. So good evening, and let's cue up the news. Our breaking Q News tonight is talking about New York Governor's amazing press conference. New York Governor Cuomo's press conference today. Before we have any comment on it, let us show you what the New York Governor said today. Watch this.
I am telling you, this government cannot meet this crisis without the resources and capacity of the federal government. And we're not Democrats and we're not Republicans. We are Americans at the end of the day. That's who we are. Life is turned upside down. It's just turned upside down. Remember those snow globes when you were a kid and You shook the globe and the snow went all over and the whole picture changed. Somebody picked up our country and just shook it. And then there's a whole component to this. Don't touch anyone. Don't hug. Don't kiss. We're human beings. That interaction is so important to us. That emotional affirmation is so important to us. It's a hard time. It is a hard time on every level. We will get through this much time. Understand what we're dealing with, understand the pressures that we're feeling, but we will get through this much time. Be a little bit more sensitive, be a little bit more loving, a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more comforting, a little bit more cooperative, and we will get through this time.
I make the prediction that today, Tuesday, March 17th, this is likely going to be one of the big moments of the coronavirus in the United States. New York Governor Cuomo had this impromptu presentation. Of course, he knew what he was going to talk about in terms of answering questions to the press, etc. But this portion, before he started to answer questions, was all impromptu off the top of his head. And he talked about the effects that Corona has had on him, his family, on New Yorkers, and America. We didn't include it in this piece, but he was very complimentary of President Trump today. And it was the most positive comments that I have heard from President Trump in the partnership between New York State and the federal government, and assured the citizens of New York that the White House was really going to try for New York. This is probably a sentinel moment of what happened today. This is one of those times where you can finally feel something's going to change. And that's what the governor of New York accomplished today. And remember, by all standards, New York is epicenter, ground zero of the coronavirus issue in the United States. So it was a big moment. In terms of this news conference and what the New York State governor said, what do y'all think?
You know, this is what being president should look like.
Yes,
if
absolutely.
Donald Trump ever should really take a page out of anybody's book, I think it's Governor Cuomo.
And 60 days ago.
And 60 days ago. Yes, this is long overdue. I wish that Donald Trump would have had the same press conference 2 months ago. Certainly knows right now that we probably would be in a much different situation that we are, and we wouldn't see all of the panic and complete and total shutdowns that we're seeing, and it could have been a very slow rolled out process, and not the rationing and decreasing of resources in grocery stores and whatnot. But, there's something that he said that I think is very important. We're not Democrats, we're not Republicans. We're all Americans at the end of the day. We need to put aside our partisan political divide and realize that, again, like I said last night, we all live, we laugh, we love, we sing, we cry, and we die, and we all get sick. So we need to collectively come together, and we're stronger together to beat this disease in the process.
I think that's exactly the point. What we're seeing here is someone that might be very presidential, though unfortunately I don't have very much belief in former mayors, Bloomberg and Giuliani, and how well they act in a crisis, and then how much they portray that many years down the road when they might be running or associated with people that are running for president. However, what I think is important to note is exactly what you said. New York is the epicenter right now, and of course it would be where so many people live. I think that part of what we're seeing here is an effort to make sure that there is coherence in all governments between state and federal, so that we can have a sense of coherence. And that is going not just to complement the president, but making sure that even if he's not doing his best job, that the people within the state can trust their personal leadership to make that personal connection to bring all of this together.
Honestly, I reflect empathy for our state governors, our organizational structures in our states here in Florida. I'm not a big fan of our governor here in Florida. However, our governors, our city mayors, et cetera, they're the ones that are taking the inaction and miscommunication that took place in Washington and out of the White House. They're taking it right on the chin. And now they must step up and work way harder than they should have originally had to do to be able to get this under control, which also brings me to a moment that I thought was incredible in today's press conference by the New York governor, which is he is basically fearful. He makes two observations. I echo it again. We're seeing it in freeze frame. It's only going to last this long. It's only going to last this long. It's only going to last this long. And then second, he said, we must get through what we are concerned of, which is the big bell curve being pushed down enough where our healthcare system is not crushed in New York. And you can't be in Washington or Texas or California or Florida or in the gayest place in planet Earth here in South Florida and not hear the governor of New York's warnings of what could happen. So he is very clear today, but he also gives us a ray of hope that he recognizes what's happening in the snow globe observation he makes and says it's going to get better because it only lasts this long. Brilliant, brilliant of the New York governor. So we continue in queuing up the world tonight by another corona-related story in the United Kingdom. The UK changes course over an outbreak after data suggests that they were heading toward disastrous results in the United Kingdom. We've prepared this piece. Watch this.
Good evening. As the pandemic of coronavirus claims more lives around the world, the people of the United Kingdom are now being advised to make drastic changes to their day-to-day existence. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, rejected criticism that his government had been slow to respond to the scale of this crisis. Mr. Johnson said now was the moment to stop all non-essential contact with other people and to avoid all non-essential travel. The over 70s and pregnant women and those with underlying health conditions, they all needed to be particularly vigilant. Entire families must self-isolate for 14 days if just one member has a persistent new cough or a high temperature. From this weekend, those with the most serious health conditions should be isolated from social contact for 12 weeks. The advice came as the number of confirmed cases in the UK rose to 1,543.
The United Kingdom's response is that if they continue to minimize many of their protocols and procedures in the United Kingdom, they were very concerned that it would lead to dramatic transmission of the coronavirus and very significant mortality rates in the United Kingdom, and have implemented many new changes. When we saw this story, we couldn't help but think of the United States because Boris and the approach in the United Kingdom for a very long time was similar to what we have watched from our own White House, and they responded in a similar inaction way. What do y'all think about what we're watching in the UK?
Well, it doesn't surprise me because, I mean, and I have to be political here because being political in this situation is pragmatic because what you've done in the past is an indicator of what you will do in the future. If you look at the response here in America, the political divide on this, the Democrats are actually taking this more seriously than Republicans, especially when it comes to a stimulus package to actually address the aftermath of this coronavirus. But you also then go over to the government of the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson, its prime minister, he's part of the Conservative Party. Conservatives have a super majority, largest majority that they've had since Margaret Thatcher. If you look at that and you see the inaction that they've taken, I think that this is something that, again, it's going to have political consequences. This is going to ensure that Donald Trump is a one-term president. His mismanagement of this is literally killing people. But I wonder how this is actually going to affect Boris Johnson, should he ever call an election again, and the way in which coronavirus is going to play out over in the United Kingdom.
Well, that's hopefully one of the things that we can look forward to. We have every other country in the world to look into the future, into the U.S.'s future, to see what's going to happen here. And there are some positive examples and some negative examples. And one of the things that we're seeing in the UK is that maybe they were slow to act, but right now they are spraying down the entire premises. They're basically going from square inch to make sure that the country is sanitized. They're doing, at least from a visual perspective, everything that they can to do this.
Can we do that in the Oval Office, by the way? Can we Clorox the Oval Office?
Actually, I was thinking, could we do that at this table?
I basically have wanted that my whole life.
Right?
Well, that's the way to keep everybody safe, of course, is just to have that personal assistant. Obviously not. But what I'm interested in here is what big changes we're going to see. Obviously, every day the story escalates dramatically, and we're seeing some changes in Trump for the first time. Maybe he'll actually step up to the plate.
Well, I was going to say to both of you, do you find irony in this story that, you know, how often do we hear from people that all over the world, they look to America to lead, that now what we've been seeing with the chaos here in the United States, where at the federal level of government, we've not seen much of a response, where we're having to see governors and we're having to see local municipalities, in particular mayors and county governments, address this issue. Do you think that what they're seeing in the United States is leading to some kind of action
There's
in the
no
UK?
question about it, and I think it is a situation that is spreading all over the world. The people that generally, the world that look to America for guidance at times of crisis, World War I, World War II, during Vietnam, during 9/11, during the world economic collapse in 2008, the world looked to America as the guidance and the leadership of how to respond. This time, that's not what is happening, and it is a political fatigue of the response and the misinformation that is coming out of Washington and the White House. And America is losing its role in America as it relates to this issue. That the rest of the world is saying, we can't sit and wait for you anymore. We must move on.
Well, it's more than that, and that's been depleting, of course, for over 5 years. But the world is now not just not looking forward to what we have to say, but they're dictating and they're helping us. We have world leaders that are helping us and telling us to look at what's going on in their countries to direct what we can do here. Anyway, we're listening to those voices, we're listening to what we have here, and we hope that you guys at home are also listening to our voices. And we want to ask you, are LGBT voices important to you? Can the news of the world have a gay community perspective? If you, like us, think the answer is a resounding yes, then like and subscribe to Q News Tonight on YouTube and on Facebook. Do our gay cultural stories impact you, your friends, and family? Start a watch party. Get your circle involved in our conversation as it supports the entire gay community.
We continue to queue up the USA to report tonight one more coronavirus-related story about, but that's all for tonight, is the Stafford Act, and it gives Trump a frightening amount of power. I just learned of this today. Napoleon, tell us what the Stafford Act does and what was Trump implying?
Well, that's exactly the story right here. There's what the Stafford Act actually does, and there's what Trump has stated that it and his other powers are. Now, Trump has gone on record, as we see right here on the prompter, and stated that we have very strong emergency powers under the Stafford Act. I, Trump, have the right to do a lot of things that people don't even know about. But the reality is that the Stafford Act just has an availability of dispersing funding between states and to different funds to help alleviate different emergencies. And it's something that has been enacted. Of course, we're in a state of emergency. But this has all been caused not just from that quotation that Trump has put out, tweeted out, but because of a viral text that has gone out that has stated that Trump is going to put the entire country on a 2-week lockdown. It's a White House tweet that has stated that the lockdown is fake news. But this is all just really confusing. Even my co-anchor Aaron and I were discussing before this what is actually real and what is not in the Stafford Act. And there are provisions in the Constitution that are related to the Commerce Clause, which has relations to the quarantine and across borders, the 10th Amendment, which states the states can quarantine, and that you can levy taxes for general welfare of the people. But none of that has to do with what he's describing right here.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I go back to 2016, that op-ed, New York Times, Hillary Clinton, I am the only thing standing between you and the apocalypse. This is a man that literally, if you look at the monopoly that he has over the Supreme Court of the United States, he himself literally has shown us that he is above the law when he shouldn't be. No one holds him accountable. When it comes to the Stafford Act, for example, he could take it so out of context like he has virtually everything else that he's used through the impeachment trial of himself and his presidency. What I find frustrating about this whole situation is that even if he does pull the Stafford Act, I think a lot of people need to understand that the constitutionality around actually quarantining people, the Constitution puts limits on what the federal government can and cannot do. You mentioned the 10th Amendment, so the Commerce Clause. So if someone actually pulls the Stafford Act, they can in return, if there's a national emergency, and as long as state governments have also recognized this as well, states can then shut down their borders. So they can quarantine people within their state borders, but not at the national level, if you will. But it depends on who the players are throughout the course of this national emergency.
Well, we are continuing queuing up the USA by reporting today it's Mini Super Tuesday. 4 states are voting today. Well, excuse me, correction. 3 states are voting today as Ohio's primary was halted by the governor amid coronavirus fears. We've prepared this summary. Watch this.
In Ohio, state leaders ordering polls closed just hours before primary voting was set to begin there. The governor making that controversial announcement after a judge initially denied his request for the election to be postponed over coronavirus concerns.
You should not force them to make this choice. Choice between their health and their constitutional rights and their duties as American citizens.
So as our viewers just saw, the Ohio primary has basically been halted by its Republican governor amid this coronavirus outbreak. Republican Governor Mike DeWine has suspended the Ohio primary, which was supposed to take place today, which would have been the third Super Tuesday, featuring states like Ohio, Florida, Arizona, and Illinois. Over 500 delegates were at stake tonight. You take Ohio out of that equation. Now you just have 3. So there's some confusion because there were a lot of people that thought that they were going to be going to the polls and voting today. And there's some confusion throughout this whole process because Mike DeWine had petitioned the courts, so the Supreme Court of the state of Ohio, and they initially blocked this, saying that, no, we're not moving this. And then the governor said, well, I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. It was only the health department.
Very Trump-like, by the way.
Very Trump-like, yes. And important to note that they are part of the same party, and they both were huge supporters of each other during their elections and campaigns. But also, outside of that, it actually was the health department that was the saving grace in this, for at least for Governor DeWine, where the health department stepped in and said, you know what, we have fears of a coronavirus. We don't think it's safe for poll workers, for local supervisor of elections offices or precincts, so we think that we should shut down the election. So ultimately they did that. The court has upheld this ruling. So now there has to be a special session in Columbus, Ohio, in its state capital, to actually recognize that June 2nd perhaps could be the potential Ohio primary.
Polls have just recently closed in Florida. Do you have any update in terms of what you project as our political focus, what you expect to see tonight?
So, Florida and Ohio are the most important primaries and general election states in the entire country. If you can build coalitions there, you can win big in a general election. Hillary Clinton won the state huge double-digit numbers in 2016. We're actually seeing that from 11% of precincts reporting right now that Joe Biden is around 54%, Senator Sanders is around 22%. I actually expect Joe Biden's lead to grow significantly. I expect him to be somewhere between 61 and 64%.
Wow,
yes.
Amazing.
And I expect that Senator Sanders will hover around probably maybe 19%. He'll definitely be viable in the state to pick up the 15% threshold to get pledged delegates. But, it'll be interesting because there was a poll that was out yesterday that had Biden winning Arizona by double digits. Same thing with Arizona. Same thing with Illinois. So if Biden does a sweep again and he wins Florida, Arizona, and Illinois, what's next for the Bernie Sanders campaign?
Yeah, and that's the question. What happens tomorrow with Bernie Sanders, or Thursday, or Friday?
Well, what was supposed to happen last Super Tuesday, last week, with the Sanders campaign? I can't be someone in Bernie Sanders' mind. I operate in reality. Unfortunately, he doesn't. 2 plus 2 is 4. It's not 5. The math is not on Senator Sanders' side. And unfortunately for him and his supporters, that's a reality that eventually they're going to have to face.
There's this ridiculous meme going around. I saw it in multiple places today of outlining the math that it's not over yet and here's the possibilities of going. And when I read it, I thought, my goodness, this is how misinformation. I wondered if Russian bots were generating it because it was so ridiculous in terms of how they get to the conclusions of what they're doing. It gives some hope that the math is going to work out in their favor, and it's just
But that's
not.
the argument of the Sanders campaign, and you have to start at the top. I mean, even with Senator Sanders, in saying basically that notion that, it's math, that the primary is rigged. The primary is not rigged. Unfortunately, and Senator Sanders has even kind of notated this, that the coalition, the revolution that he's trying to build is not turning out. Young people, that revolution it's not turning out. So when you're not winning, it's not the establishment that's propping up your opposition. It's that your revolution is false. It's not turning out to support you. And if this continues, like I think that we will continue to see that Senator Sanders loses primary after primary after primary, he's going to have a pragmatic conversation with himself and with others, and he needs to suspend his campaign and get behind a Democrat, whoever that person is. Obviously, it's going to be Joe Biden, to ensure that we make Donald Trump a one-term president.
Yeah. We're going to queue up the USA and continue moving forward tonight, reporting about a lesbian deputy running against the sheriff who fired her. We've prepared this. Watch this.
And I was faced with the most difficult decision of my career. I did not stay quiet. I did not go with the flow. And ultimately, it cost me my job. But it was an easy decision for me to make because I stand on ethical, moral integrity. That's who I am. And as sheriff, that is what I will bring to the table.
As our viewers just saw, that was a campaign ad. There's a lesbian former deputy sheriff running against the sheriff who fired her. This is taking place in Ohio. She is a Democrat. Her name is Charmaine McGuffey. She's openly LGBT, highest ranking individual for a woman in Hamilton County within that sheriff's department. She is running against the sheriff that fired her, named Jim Neal, who was also a Democrat, got some flack in the past for actually attending a Trump rally in 2016. So some people question his authenticity to progressive values and commitment to progressive values. And this is taking place in Hamilton County, Ohio. The state party, interestingly enough, Jim Neal is the incumbent Democrat, and the state party, the Ohio Democratic Party, has actually gotten behind Charmaine McGuffey.
Any understanding of what likely will be the results of this election?
Well, we will not know because the primary for this was supposed to be today. So depending on whenever that primary is rescheduled, let's say it's June 2nd, then hopefully we'll see progress for the LGBTQ community. And if she wins, I'm sure Q News Tonight is going to cover that because Q News Tonight is part of the Happening Out television network. As you know, we are the Daily News. But you can also watch the best of entertainment live every Monday night at 8 p.m. on happening.fun. We are also part of the most popular live gay TV show in the entire world, which airs every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. on It's Happening Out. It's a talk show like television's The View, but with a whole lot of gay people.
I'm sitting here thinking in my head, but I'm going to be silent tonight.
And the world clapped for the first time.
Well,
moving forward.
We continue in queuing up entertainment tonight in a new study that is revealed that finds Caitlyn Jenner has actually helped trans acceptance among older generations in America. It is a story that is interesting. Caitlyn Jenner is considered a sentinel transitional moment for the trans community when Caitlyn Jenner announced and transitioned. What do y'all think about these study results in terms of the effect that it has on older people?
Well, it's so interesting to see that this happened at the same time that Donald Trump came to be where he is, to the point that South Park had to parody Caitlyn Jenner and Donald Trump essentially running for office together. I'm really curious to hear your opinion since it's talking about the older generation and asking if you're feeling accepting of her, because I know that I personally, and that's not any kind of personal opinion about it. No, quite honestly, it's not.
Are you calling Alberta old?
Well, trans rights have been in the spotlight since 2015, which is about the time that Caitlyn Jenner was there and came into power, or whatever you would say that is, because his whatever spotlight from beforehand of being an Olympic athlete had faded, and his being a part of the Kardashian family had been something else. So at the time, it was something that was interesting because there were questions as to if it was authentic or not, and if it was just a publicity stunt.
Well, there's no question at this point it was not a publicity stunt. Caitlyn Jenner has lived.
That's an expensive publicity
That's
stunt.
exactly right. Well, they have
$500 million.
I was going to say they have $1 billion in the family, so they're okay. Don't cry for me, Argentina. But Caitlyn Jenner has been loyal to a message and mission statement, and so I give her credit for that. I'm not a big fan of Caitlyn Jenner by any stretch. I'm not a fan of Caitlyn Jenner's.
Why?
However, well, I don't like a lot of the politics.
Which she's walked back, to be fair.
Yes and no. It teeter-totters depending on when it is best for Caitlyn Jenner. And I'm not a big fan of that, and I'm not a big fan of Caitlyn Jenner because of it. But broadly, I do agree with the study findings that Caitlyn Jenner was a person that allowed people that looked at Caitlyn before transition as one thing, one of the greatest sports stars, as Bruce Jenner, and after what Bruce Jenner became. And as a result, it allowed them to process it to a conclusion that they thought was positive. And if that is true, then I applaud Caitlyn Jenner, because that's valuable for the entire trans community. Now, I just wish older Americans would do the same thing for black trans women who are the most abused and have the greatest risk of murder in America. Tonight, we are broadcasting from our studio set in the middle of the World AIDS Museum and Education Center here in Wilton Manors and Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We joke we're coming from the gayest place on planet Earth. All you have to do is look at the boys around this table and know that that is true. We also thank our set designer, Concepto Modern Living, who helped make this set here in Fort Lauderdale possible. We move on to queuing up good news. And there's a phenomenon going on in the internet. We're going to have to learn how to entertain ourselves going forward. And I don't mean in the way Aaron frequently entertains himself.
Dominoes!
That's not what I was thinking either. There are many things on the internet that are going to be fun. And celebrities are doing impromptu concerts.
Yeah.
And David Foster did one last night with Hallelujah. And we have one prepared of showing you what Pink has done. A concert from her home, I think literally at our kitchen table. Watch this.
Okay, I've decided to learn the piano once and for all. We'll see.
So as our viewers just saw on the Instagram account of Grammy Award winner Pink, Pink and many others like David Foster are holding concerts from home because a lot of people were taking this self-quarantine around coronavirus. We have another coronavirus story, very seriously. So in an effort to kind of entertain people while they are isolating themselves from the rest of the world, and these concerts and their venues and their artists are canceling said gigs, they're finding another platform, if you will, to entertain people, and I applaud them for doing so.
Exactly, and I know that we make the joke about it being another coronavirus story, but right now there's nothing else. You cannot escape it because we all have a mission as civilians to make sure that we are interacting and enacting the social distancing, and that's why efforts like this are so important, to make sure that we can keep our mental health and our spirits high while we're interacting from our social distance.
To our LGBT community, make sure you go onto YouTube and look at David Foster's video that he did. He had a group of friends do Hallelujah, and it is absolutely stunning and breathtaking. You should go to YouTube and watch it. We're going to end the show tonight by having the big finish. There are many stories that went on today that we only want to mention, mostly because coronavirus sucks all the oxygen out of the room, and Aaron Dar. Let's see if Aaron and Napoleon and I can entertain each other and see if we can have a lightning round of the LGBT news of the day and news with an LGBT perspective. If any of us talk too long, we will cut each other off, but we think it might be fun. Now, we understand what we're doing.
As always, every night. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that's right. So this is Q News' tonight, the big finish. Big finish story number one. The Houston Texans coach is less popular among fans in Texas than Donald Trump is with Democrats.
I guess everything really is bigger in Texas, including his disapproval rating.
And absolutely nobody is surprised that Texans do not approve of soccer.
I think it's hilarious that we're talking about approval ratings of the Houston Texans when both of my anchor partners, Aaron Dar and Napoleon Plays, have absolutely no idea what sport we're talking about. The big finish, Ezra Miller says LGBTQ plus people are just better at sex than straight people.
Well, it says than straights, which is a fun derogatory term, and I have to imagine that that must have been part of your straight life, Al, when he had sex with you, to figure out what that meant.
I am going to quote my friend Mariah Carey here and say, I don't even know her. I have no clue who Ezra Miller is.
This is not even an interesting story to me because I have known the truth that gay men are better at sex than straights longer than Ezra Miller has been alive. The big finish. The DOJ moves to drop charges against Russians accused of funding a troll farm.
We're laughing, our viewers at home that don't know the backstory on this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Hooked on Phonics is a very wonderful thing. The reading rainbow, it's the other kind of rainbow that Al Ferguson has partaken in many points of his life. He kept reading it as the DOG, which coincidentally is the word dog.
Hey, to some that means God, but really honestly what I'm laughing at is just that the Department of Justice has dropped charges against Russia. Given all things and Trump being in office, I can't help but laugh with all of those factors involved.
There's no irony here.
I couldn't help but wonder if the DOJ moves to drop charges against Russians accused of funding a troll farm. Where are the damn Hillary emails? I want to know. I want to know. The big finish. Rumor has it that MSNBC wants Mayor Pete to replace Chris Matthews.
And just a little insight into the headline here. Al Ferguson was immediately excited by this story because he's like, oh my God, I love this Adele song. Rumor has it.
This just reminds me of when I eat really spicy food and sometimes I want to go back to the very mild ones. I'm wondering what they're trying to accomplish here at MSNBC.
I, frankly, was very excited on this news, and I hope the rumor is true because finally we would get a moderate at MSNBC. The big finish. Trump rates himself a 10 out of 10 on coronavirus.
And the world hopes that means 10 out of 10 positive tests.
Yeah, and I also am going to go ahead and rate President Trump here as a 10 out of 10 on always breaking the scale.
And I want to remind you, America, when Trump said he was doing a 10 out of 10 on his performance on coronavirus, I thought of two segment groups. A, I thought about millennials. B, I thought about those people that didn't vote. Congratulations to both of those groups. You earned a 10 for electing a president that said he was a 10 out of 10. The big finish. Happy 258th anniversary to St. Patrick's Day. It's St. Patrick's Day, yay! It is almost as old as Aaron's owl jokes.
You know, what I love about St. Patrick's Day, we often have the conversation about my love for fast food. I'm so excited around this time every year because the Shamrock Shake at McDonald's. You can have it your way.
I'm baffled by the lack of green that we have on set and right here. Hopefully we can bring a little bit more spirit for the next day.
Just your green envy.
As the only person at the table who has been to Dublin and to the St. Patrick's Day parade, I'm a little sad about what's going on in St. Patrick's Day. But I'm very, very happy to report that at least I get to spend this St. Patrick's Day with two leprechauns that are sitting here at the table with me.
I'm taller than you, come on.
The big finish. On this day in 1931, Nevada legalized, it seems to me you speak a little too quickly there. The big finish. On this day in 1931, Nevada legalized gambling.
And as is the Irish tradition with the Catholics, on this day in 1931, Al Ferguson had his first communion.
I just want to say top of the morning to you, lad, after that. And I'm curious now where all that money went that Nevada's been investing in.
You know, I don't think gambling is really interesting in Nevada, even though it was legalized in 1931, revolutionizing really the entire world. What is far more interesting is that Nevada legalized prostitution 14 years before they legalized gambling. That is today's news for the LGBT community on the world's first daily gay evening news show. Remember, if it's important to the LGBT community, it is important to Q News Tonight. And we are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. And this is Q News Tonight. We remind you, this Thursday, March 19th, we are going to have a special segment called Q&A on coronavirus. And Dean Trentellis, the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, the gayest place on planet Earth, medical specialists and HIV specialists are going to be with us to answer your questions about coronavirus, very specific to the LGBT community. It's very important. It's the only place in the country where you can hear live question and answer live. So we hope you'll tune in. Thank you, and we're going to see you tomorrow night at 7.